Welcome to A Little Too Quiet. It's the Ferndale Library podcast. It's brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. My name's Jeff. I'm joined by Damon.
Hi.
And I'm joined by Everett.
Hello.
We're here to talk about games. Board games specifically.
Woohoo.
You know, I wanted to start off really quickly with this. Can we just talk about what do we think has allowed board games to have staying power? I'm coming at this from like a cynic who is now saying that we live in an age of phones where we have our Candy Crushes and so much to distract us. But what keeps us coming back to the table? Literally to the table. What gives board games their staying power? I mean, they've been around for 2,000 years, but...
Personally, on individual scale, or as a society?
Well, you could go personal. I mean, the podcast is really the time for armchair philosophizing, but... How about personal? What's kept them staying power for you two? That's good. You don't want to speak with authority for society. You can just...
Well, I just think there's a long history of board games, so I think that does lend to its staying power. But individually, it's social, and it allows, folks to engage at whatever level they're able to, energy level, social level, however they're. And because there's so many different types, you might play some games with some friends and some games with others, and that's just very versatile.
I really like how it brings people together, and it's a really good way of connecting with other people. I kind of like to think of myself as, what's that book where... Oh my goodness, the second T.J. Klune book. The...
Under the Whispering Door?
Yes, that one. That's the one. We even read it for book club. Where one of the main characters has the ability to give the perfect tea to each person, like their perfect ideal tea. I like to try doing that with board games. I like to get to know somebody, find out their likes or dislikes, what kind of stuff they're into, because maybe they're going to be into lighter party games. Maybe they're going to be into the heavy 4-hour-long strategy games, and finding that great fit for them is so much fun for me.
Mm-hmm. You know, this is so candid and tangential, but the most trouble I have, and I'm really putting my friends on blast, but the most trouble I have with my friends who are now in their old upper 30s and above is it's hard for me to sell games on them because often we're hanging out on the weekend, the sun has set, and now they are tired, and now they are sleepy, and they are reserved to, just put a movie on. And it kills me every time because they maybe feel daunted about having to learn a new game. But in its own way, the learning part is also fun, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm kind of a nerd. I read board game rulebooks in my free time for fun.
That's awesome.
I'm definitely out of the ordinary in doing so.
Yeah.
But I really enjoy learning and teaching games. And I'm definitely very fortunate. I have some dear close friends that we have regularly game nights with almost every weekend. So,
Everett, head of youth services, can you remember whether or not, at memory test, we had board games before you arrived here? And then also, Damon, the same. I'm assuming libraries that you'd previously been at had board games. This has become a thing where libraries are circulating board games.
I think if we went back to 2019, there was the beginning of puzzles here, but not for kids yet.
Right.
So now we have a kids puzzle and game collection kind of geared to just kid age level stuff, as well as adults having and older kids for like a family game night. Definitely at other libraries, I think that trend started like 2017 because there's a lot of mechanics that go into like, okay, this puzzle has 1,000 pieces and we're going to check it out to our families. And is it going to come back with 1,000 pieces? How do we manage it if it doesn't? So it's not quite, most books come back with all their pages.
Sure.
So we don't have to count them. We know they're there. They're bound. But the pieces involved in puzzles and board games are not the same. So I think libraries have been finding the best way to manage that so that we can have, quality puzzles and games available.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say of the 4 libraries I have worked at in my life, 2 of them, including Ferndale, have board games. 2 of them did not. Mm-hmm. For one of them, it was merely a staffing thing. You really need to have the ability to have staff on hand to be able to check them. Like Everett's saying, it is a much larger process to check in a board game than just scanning a book.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a lot, there's a lot of research that goes in, just like how the librarians here are selecting books, look at reviews and do research to pick quality materials. The same level goes into board games.
I love it.
And puzzles. So, I mean, not everyone might know that there are review sites and YouTube channels that are just all about reviewing these games.
Right.
And that's the length that our staff go to make sure that we're getting things that would be good for our community, that our community will want to check out.
Right. It's not just as simple as, that one sounds cool.
Exactly.
It might start there, though. I also wanted to go around and just ask, what games you have played recently, or what was the most recent game that really blew your mind, that you had a blast with?
I can definitely start with this. I recently played my longtime favorite game. It is called Grand Austria Hotel. And in it, you are running a hotel. Mm-hmm. You are opening up new rooms to fit people inside it. And you're trying to convince them to come stay at your hotel by offering them food in your cafe. So it's kind of engine buildy. You are getting staff members that have different abilities that you can activate. There's a really cool drafting dice action where the more dice of a number that get rolled, the more powerful that action is, which is super cool. And I've never seen anything like it. And it's a blast.
How many players?
It's 1 to 4.
Just, okay.
There is a solo mode as well.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yep.
Which is a whole thing. You can do solo games, which we like.
Yeah, I'm not a big solo gamer myself, but more and more board games these days, especially the strategy ones, tend to have solo modes for people that, I really think the pandemic made a difference in that. Mm-hmm. Solo gaming already existed prior to that, but more and more games nowadays are very conscious of trying to provide that.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Everett?
I recently played something called Tinder Blocks. It's a small tin game, so about the size, a little bigger than a deck of cards box, with cards that are even smaller inside, with pieces that represent logs and red and yellow bits of fire. And it comes with some very strategically built plastic tweezers that are meant to make it very hard for you to stack these into. It's almost like reverse engineered Jenga. Instead, you're building this tower instead of slowly taking it down. And it is, I think, 2 to 6 players. Okay. And it's just hilarious because, those fine motor skills, they wax and wane maybe. And and they engineered this game to look easy, but it's actually quite hard. I will say it didn't come with a 2-player variant, which I wish it had, so I made one up. Because otherwise you very easily have a winner within just a couple back and forth. So it's kind of like best 2 out of 3, whoever gets 3 strikes first, I guess, more like that. And it's really fun. And it could be, it's a game that it's very mobile. You can take that anywhere to a friend's house, or, you're out to eat. That's more and more common that both restaurants are sort of trying to get people to come do games, or are just open to people bringing games with them. So that would be an easy one to do. You don't need a lot of table space. And it's you were saying friends may not want to learn new games, all the rules. It's very simple.
Perfect. And so I've checked out 3 games from the library recently that were very easy to learn for my old tired friends. One of them was called Smartass. One of them was called Exploding Kittens, and the other was called Charty Party. Now, all 3 of these games are really trivia-centric and card-based, so kind of quick and easy to learn. So we had a good time with all 3 of them. But also wanted to put a quick plug in for the Board Game Club, which is here at the library that Damon founded. And so, Damon, does that also go into it, the whole explaining of rules? Do you have to choose games based on that? Tell us about that club and
absolutely.
how you run it.
Yeah, so there is no experience required to come to Board Game Club. To clarify, this is for middle schoolers. It is 6th through 8th grade. We meet on the 2nd Thursday of each month. So our next board game night will be on June 8th. Mm-hmm. And I've currently got a good, consistent group of 5 middle schoolers that come, and would love to continue to grow that. Awesome. So if you are a middle schooler listening, or a parent of a middle schooler that loves games or is curious about trying out games, please sign up. You can go to fadl.org/MSBG, standing for Middle School Board Games, and you sign up for that. So it's a lot of fun. I usually try to have a variety of games with me that I'm ready to teach the kids, and we have a blast.
That's great. Monopoly, Clue, sorry. These are on, I guess, may or may not be on the game board or the board game Mount Rushmore. We all play them as children. Are there games that you remember discovering sometime in your youth that really turned you on to board game, that really solidified a lifelong love of board game playing? Some like early favorite games.
Well, I actually don't think my childhood turned me into a board game loving person. Sure. That came later in life.
Yeah, for me, I loved it as a child and fell away from it and then came back to it.
Yeah, on a previous sort of gaming related podcast, I mentioned that my family was a card playing family. So there were a couple like games that we might have, but I think mostly it was card games. And I know I mentioned, oh my goodness, I will not try to explain that game again, but it's basically a card game that was passed down in my family that I've literally never met anybody beyond someone on a Reddit thread that knew what I was talking about.
Damon.
I'm very curious, Everett. What is the name of this game?
Oh my goodness.
No, the name is.
It's called Oh My Goodness.
Well, that's the G-rated name that we were taught because we were kids.
Right.
And
gotcha. Okay.
So yeah, but I think that honestly, I did solo gaming as a kid, so I was really into things like set or sequence. And then I sort of branched out to like Othello. Yeah. I think I started off into really a more cerebral, strategic kind of gaming interest, and then I became a young adult, and that changed. Yeah. And I like the co-op games. I like a little bit of goofiness. And what about you, David?
Yeah, I definitely did play a lot of more board games growing up. My family had a whole closet space that was all board games. But I am the youngest of 4, and so sometimes convincing my older siblings to play with me was always a challenge. My parents were often willing to play, but I always had that desire. So some of the most common ones we played as a kid, Yahtzee a lot. Just classic Yahtzee. We had this game called Careers, which is kind of similar to a Monopoly. It's a roll and move where you roll a die to move around a board, but you are going to college and going down different career tracks. And there's a little bit more control over your movement rather than just the dice. You have cards of certain values to go to certain spaces, which is cool.
I was just going to say, you've mentioned strategy games. I've said Exploding Kittens card games, roll and move. We do want to get into types of games, and Damon, you're especially going to be ready to do that.
I'm so ready for this, Jeff. I am so ready for this. So there are, if I were to go through everything, it would take forever. There are dozens of genres of games, and sometimes games will be a part of multiple genres just to how the nature of how games are. I did jot down 13 of my favorites to quickly go through and just talk about how they work. Because I think there's this idea out there for a lot of people that board games are the thing you think of when you think of a board game is going to be Monopoly or Clue or Sorry or Chutes and Ladders and so on and so forth. And those games have their time and place and their merit, and that is wonderful. But the wide variety of how games have developed over time, and especially now, we are in a board game renaissance. There is so much awesome, wonderful stuff coming out that if you limit yourself to just the classics, you're missing out on so much opportunity. So before going into the different types of board games, I want to talk about a couple of terms within the board gaming community, because there is some problematic stuff. You definitely meet board gamers that have they can be a bit full of themselves sometimes, and I definitely try to shy away from that. So 2 giant overarching category of games. You've got Euro-style games, which I'll talk about in a second, and the other category known as Ameritrash. Now, I detest that term. I think it's awful. I think there are many games within that genre that are fantastic games. But if you talk to some really heavy board gamers, those are terms you're going to be hearing thrown around. So Ameritrash tends to be highly thematic games about different TV shows or movies or monsters or, big themes. There's usually a lot of luck involved, usually often involving dice. There's a lot of screw your fellow player over actions in these sorts of games. They tend to be big monsters beating each other up, other franchises, and so on and so forth. Where a Euro-style game is tending to be more highly strategic games, where in the most Euro of the Euro games, it almost feels like you are playing solitaire with other people. Because the actions you are doing, the things you are doing on your turn, are not affecting how other people are playing, with the exception of you might get a card before somebody takes that card, or you might get a spot on the board before another player gets there. There's not so much of in-your-face sort of stuff going on with that. Most of it I tend to play tends to be this Euro style, but again, I play definitely across the field in both of them, and they're both there's lots of games in both of them that are fantastic.
Fascinating. The word competition just came into my head because the way you're describing that Euro game, which is completely new to me, it in a way you're not exactly competing in a traditional sense. Like, it's fascinating.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And there's such wide variety in
Like
even
you're
within
doing your
the Euro
own
game.
thing.
Yeah.
That's
So those are two kind of overarching categories, but then going through different genres within both of them, really. We've got, I already mentioned roll and moves. So this is you roll a die and you move spaces. Sometimes it's a little bit different, like, oh, in Trouble, instead of rolling a die, you're popping the die in the middle. Or in Sorry, you're drawing a card and it'll say the number that you move. But the idea is there's a lot of randomness involved. That's going to be games like Monopoly, The Game of Life, which we have in our collection. Chutes and Ladders, we also have in our collection here. But there are more modern board games out there as well that use this mechanic, such as Formula D, where you are playing as race cars, changing your gears and going around a racetrack, and it's a cool implementation of it.
fun.
It's great. We also have abstract games. So those are games that tend to, even if they have a theme, the theme is completely irrelevant. If you were to take the theme away, the game would be exactly the same. Oftentimes these are tile-laying games.
Okay.
So like chess would be the perfect example of a abstract game, because if you change the pieces to something else, you can still play chess with it. It's going to be the same exact type of game. Modern games, we have the game called Azul, which is you are building like a floor with different tile patterns on it. The game Calico, where you are building a quilt and trying to attract cats and get buttons on that quilt. But again, you take the theme away, you're playing pattern tiles next to each other. It's kind of cool.
I've seen variations of that, and it might be Ameritrash, but there are Star Wars Trivial Pursuit or Downton Abbey Clue. That's maybe apples and oranges, but you're taking away. Don't worry, folks.
It's stripping away. Yeah, totally. I will say that both Azul and Calico that I just mentioned are in our collection here. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to point out when we have them, because a lot of these games we do have at our library. We have an excellent purchaser for games here who takes all sorts of suggestions as well. So if you ever have any games you want to see in the collection, please let somebody on staff know, and we can pass that message along. And if we have the budget for it, we'll see about that. Yeah. There are area control games. So those are games where you are trying to take up as much space on the board as possible. Oftentimes these are like war themed. So the classic game of Risk is this exactly. You are trying to get your army to take over the entire world. I played a more modern game. It's called Battle Sheep, and you've got a pile of sheep. It starts with a pile of 10 sheep, and then you divide it in half and put the sheep in one direction, and you're trying to like block people off from. It kind of feels like that old computer game Jazzball. I don't know if you ever played that one. Yeah. There's a ball bouncing around. You've got to divide the screen into smaller and smaller spaces to keep the ball inside. It's great. So those are great area control games. One of my favorite styles of games are campaign games or legacy games. So those are games that have a story that after you finish the game, you play it again and continue right where you left off. So in some, there's a book that you're playing through and you just go to the next page and there's more that happens. In some, you're actually modifying the board or the cards themselves. So these ones we obviously can't own at the library because they get torn up on purpose in the game. I am currently playing through Betrayal Legacy. So it's Betrayal at House on the Hill is a game that some of you may know about. You are wandering through a haunted house, and eventually somebody turns traitorous, and you have to try to take them down. It's fantastic. But in the Legacy version, you are playing through multiple generations of a family. And so each player that is playing is a different family unit. And if you survive one, you might be, oh, I was 16 in this game. Now we're on the next one. And now I am 42 years old. And it's great. It's so fantastic.
These are kind of games where you said you can change the board.
The hardest thing I ever had to do, Jeff, was playing my first Legacy game when it told me to tear up a card. It was such a difficult thing as a board gamer to take a card and rip it in half, and I almost just put it aside. But I did it. I pushed it on through, and now that we're used to it, our group will fight over who gets to destroy things. It's great. Pandemic Legacy is another one out there. There's actually multiple. They call them seasons of that. It's all the same story, and that's great. And you're adding stickers to the board and tearing things off and punching holes in boxes to get new things out. You never really know what's next. It's super, super cool. Perhaps my favorite style of game is deck builders. And so those are games that you start with a small hand of cards, usually about 10, and you are acquiring other cards throughout the game to add to your deck to make your deck more powerful, eventually to be able to get victory points in the game. The classic version of that is Dominion. That's from, I want to say 2008 or so when it first came out, but I don't remember exactly. But there's different variations on this now. One of my favorites is called Clank, and you are building a deck while going through a dungeon and exploring and trying to find treasure. Very, very cool.
Amazing. You're building it as you go. Is that similar to a campaign Legacy in which you're kind of manipulating the board?
Yes, except that it's all self-contained as one time. So when the game is over, you just wrap everything up. When you play next time, you're starting with that same starting deck.
Sure.
You always start with the same, in this case, 10 cards.
I wonder if Arkham Horror would fall into that a little bit, because you aren't ripping up cards, but every time you play it, the game will instruct you to take. It's now turnover card number 16. And so you aren't necessarily using all of the cards, but the game will kind of guide you as to when you get to reveal certain cards, which makes the gameplay kind of different each time you do it.
This is deck builder, you called it?
Deck building.
Deck building?
Yep. Yep. And then what Everett's referring to is more like campaign style. Yeah, exactly. Similar to deck builders, a newer genre is bag building, and it's the same idea. You've got a bag of items that you're pulling out, or tiles that you're pulling out that you're adding to that bag. It's one of my favorite new genres. There's a great game out there called Quacks of Quedlinburg, where you are a witch brewing a potion, and you are buying new potion ingredients, and it's got a bit of a press your luck element to it, with you keep pulling out, but if you pull too many of the wrong ingredients, your potion will explode, and then you have to stop. So if you stop before that, then you get a higher reward, but if you keep going, maybe you'll get a little bit more before it explodes. Maybe it'll explode. Super fun.
But jump back to deck building. What is it about it you think you appreciate most, or what your favorite thing about it?
I love the wide variety in what you can do. Oftentimes in deck builders, there'll be a row of randomized cards, so you don't know what necessarily will come out. And so I really like trying to get to see what strategy is going to work this time. Like, oh, the board is arranged this way this time, so maybe I want to focus more on getting this action rather than this action. Or maybe I always play this way and I want to try out a brand new strategy this time and see how it goes. You never quite know what you're going to get. And it's like everybody's starting from the same place, and it's just so cool to see the different directions people take with it.
Good for fans of choose your own adventure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. I've got a couple more. I'm almost through them.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I love it.
So Everett mentioned, what was that game you were talking about in the small tin?
Tinderblocks.
Yeah, Tinderbox. So that is a dexterity game. So it's literally a game involving physical skill. And so classic game would be Jenga. But Tinderbox would be a more modern version of that. We have a game in our collection called Tokyo Highway, where you are laying out, they basically are popsicle sticks, and you're placing cards on them, and you're making this really odd highway-shaped configuration, and trying not to get things to fall. It's a lot of fun. Yep.
Precision is key.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Precision is definitely key in dexterity games. We've got drafting games. So that is, you are choosing from a set of options and then passing it to the next player. These are usually with cards, sometimes with dice. So one that a lot of people play these days is called Sushi Go. And you literally are holding a hand of cards of adorable sushi with human faces on them, which sounds terrifying, but it's so cute. The tofu card is so adorable. I cannot get over it. And it's happening simultaneously. So like everybody will start with 8 cards. You choose one at the same time as everybody else, pass it to the next player, choose one from your new pile, pass it until there's no cards left. And then the different types of sushi will be worth different numbers of points. You play 3 rounds, and then it's over.
A whole other layer to all this is the artistry that I think we just have to note of appreciation for the artistry that goes into this.
Oh, yes.
Be it sushi or whatever else. Like
there's a really nice attention to detail in these games.
It's beautiful.
It's amazing. And we actually have Sushi Go here at the library.
Great.
Another one we have is Draftosaurus, where you are drafting little dinosaur pieces in your hand, and you're like hiding them in your hand and secretly taking one and passing it to the next player. And they're going in your dinosaur zoo. And different dinosaurs, like, you want to have 2 of the same type of dinosaurs in the love pen, because then they'll fall in love with each other. Or you want this other pen that has like all different types of dinosaurs in it, because they're all going to be a community there. It's great.
How does one win a game like that? What's the goal? What's the object?
Different placements will get you different points. And by the end, you just add up your points.
That's great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. A couple more. We have engine building games. So it's where you start with very little and you are growing your resources into getting more resources or getting new actions and eventually converting that into victory points. A beautiful one out there. It's called Wingspan in our library collection.
Oh, I've seen this game. It is staggeringly beautiful.
It's so gorgeous. You have
art.
all these beautiful bird cards that you're playing on your mat. Different birds have different habitats. By playing different birds in different places, you're unlocking different actions, which is your engine that you're building up. You lay eggs on them. Like, it is so, so pretty. And the coolest thing about Wingspan, there's expansions for them, and they're continually coming out. So the original Wingspan was one set of birds. Then they added the Europa expansion, which are strictly European birds. Then there's the Oceania expansion, which is Australian birds. And the most recent one was the Asian expansion. I forget what it's called, with brand new birds. And each one adds a small mechanic, but it's not hard to add it to the rest of it.
That's something you see in video games too, expansions. Can you just explain that for the listeners? How
Sure.
that works?
So oftentimes games will have like a base game where it's what you need to play the game. Mm-hmm. But then a year later, 2 years later, there might be an expansion release, which would be like in a card game, new cards added in with new powers or new abilities, or a new mechanic being introduced in it, or a 2-player mode, or an expansion that adds the game was up to 4 players. Now you can play with 5 players with an expansion, which is, if I ever have that, I always instantly buy expansions that give to a 5th player. My main board game group has 5 people. It works out very well to get that extra player.
Right.
Yeah. One last thing about Wingspan as a thing. If you ever play Wingspan, search your phone's app store for Wing Song. It's a free app. Some person developed it, and it basically, you take the app, it give access to your camera on your phone, and then you scan the card, any of the cards in the game, and it will play the song the bird sings in real life. It is super cool. There are some Easter eggs as well. Scan the Roadrunner card, you're gonna get some classic meep meep. It's wonderful. Yeah. Looks like I have 2 more on here. We've got Roll and Write or Flip and Write, and so that is you've got either a deck of cards or you've got some dice that you roll, and then everybody playing gets to choose from the pool of options, and they're going to be writing things on their board. Mm-hmm. So one of the ones I played a lot is called Welcome To, and you are designing a neighborhood. You're putting your houses in sequential order from lower to higher across the street. You're dividing them into subdivisions, and so each card will either have a number or an action, and you take one of each and you put them on your board, and it's really cool.
And what are you writing down, per se?
So on this, you're writing down numbers in the houses. You're writing down fences between the houses. You are increasing the value of the stock market. And you are putting pools behind some of the houses as well.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. But a more classic roll and write, Yahtzee. I mean, Yahtzee is a classic roll and write. You're rolling dice up to 3 times, and then you're choosing a value to put it in, which is exactly the heart behind what a roll and write is going to be. And then finally, we have worker placement games, which are games where you have a pool of workers, usually like 4 to 6 workers, that there are spots on the board that they can visit. And by visiting those spots, you get to activate an action. Oftentimes, there'll be limited spaces on the board for each worker. So if I place a worker here, then Everett, sorry, I blocked you out. You have to go somewhere else with your worker. So we've got Carcassonne in our collection, which is a great example of that. Playing tiles, building cities, placing farmers. More very new one is called Creature Comforts, which is one of my new favorite games. You are woodland creatures preparing for winter by making your home as cozy as possible. It is so beautiful. And yes, we have it here. You should definitely check it out.
I'm so curious. What are the elements that would make it cozy? Are you in the game? Are you like getting a new armchair or a new Afghan? Or...
Oh, yes. And not only that, they play off of each other. So you can get the rocking chair, Jeff. But if you have the rocking chair and the quilt, they go together. So they get you more points that way. It's beautiful. You could have the ice skates, but if you also have the cozy socks, the ice skates, they're worth more points. You can have the mandolin and the flute to get more points. I mean, it's so beautiful. And the art in that game is just so cozy. Yeah. Even if you don't want to check out the game, if you see it on our board game shelf, please feel free, open it up. Make sure you put everything back where it belongs after. Mm-hmm. But look at those cards. They are beautiful. There are board game cards as one of the cozy items, and they are actual... artistic renderings of other board games. So Wingspan is one of those cards. It's very cute. I love it. Everdell is another one. Yeah.
You know, we recently had a very tabletop RPG centric game. And in that one, we kind of opened up by distinguishing between tabletop RPGs and traditional board games. But I'd love to just hear from you, Damon. Like, how would you, if anyone gets those muddled up in their heads, how do you distinguish them?
There are going to be some exceptions to this, but for the most part, with tabletop RPGs, you and your fellow players are participating in telling the story together. Right. You're coming up with it, starting from scratch, from nothing. Some will involve maps when you've got battles and stuff going on, but not all will. Generally, with a tabletop RPG, there's one person who is the game master or dungeon master, depending on the system, that is kind of leading everything along. They come up with the world and some voices for some of the characters and what happens. They roll dice to see what happens. Or in a board game, you come with all of the components you need. You're not having to come up with stuff on your own. Mm-hmm. It's just following directions, reading the rules, and doing that. Of course, there are board games with storytelling elements to them.
Right.
Yeah. They kind of blur the lines a little bit. It's kind of hard to classify one or the other.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah,
it's cool that some board games do have that element of some improvisation that you can manipulate it.
Yes.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Everett, what was that game you mentioned? Arkham
Horror.
Arkham Horror. Literally horror in the title.
Yes. It's, boy, now I'm forgetting the person's name. It's inspired by...
Lovecraft.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, really just terrifying creatures that you're trying to keep in the depths of wherever they're coming from.
Right.
Before they wreak havoc on Arkham.
Right.
Yeah, and actually, that reminds me that I didn't even talk about cooperative games, because Arkham Horror is cooperative, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know if I think it might have a competitive element, but it's generally, I don't honestly know how you could do it by yourself. It's hard enough with your friends.
Fair enough. Yeah, so cooperative games are you and your fellow players are working together against the board. Mm-hmm. You are trying to either win all together or you all lose together. Mm-hmm. It is a super fun way of doing games. And we have a few in our collection. Pandemic is one of them. Mm-hmm. And so you are trying to prevent the spread of a deadly disease. And yes, this game came out long before COVID, but it was definitely made a little bit more relevant during COVID times. But they don't have to be bigger, heavier games to be cooperative. Yeah. One of my new favorites, again, we have it here. It's called So Clover. And it is a word-based collaborative game where you have a Clover board in front of you. And on the board, there are 4 corners that you put word cards on. And each word card will have words along all 4 edges. So you've got... this is hard to do over a microphone without showing you in person. But basically, what's going to happen is you play your word cards out, and then each of the 4 leaves of the clover will have 2 words next to each other.
Yeah.
without showing the other players, you're going to take those 2 words and you're going to write one word on the leaf that combines the 2 of them together.
This is Will Short's favorite game. There's no doubt. Yeah.
You might have the words banana and water.
Sure.
And you might use the word kayak, because a kayak is basically a banana and water. I don't know. That's a little out of the box.
Okay, cool. Okay.
After you write your 4 things, you take all your cards off the board, and it's up to the other players to figure out the correct placement of them on your board.
Oh, that's so cool.
And they're getting to talk together. It's cool. It's collaborative. You're working together. So it's not like the first person to do it gets points. No. You can talk with each other and decide together. And there's an extra card thrown in to help throw people off from what's really happening. It is goofy. It is fun. I am a big fan of games with wordplay involved. It's great.
Yeah. And if you like wordplay, cooperative wordplay games, Codenames Duet.
Oh, yes.
Is another one that, again, I would say entry level game that's not a classic game, but it's not going to take you 4 hours to play either. And it is very word based, and you are working with your teammate to uncover all of the secret agents before the assassin gets them, without accidentally running into the assassin or killing innocent bystanders, which
That's
sounds
great.
like super high stakes, but it's cards with words on them. It's a 5x5 grid, and you have to, to yourself, you can't, there's a little bit of secrecy, but you are trying to get your teammate to guess, where there is a little decoder card to let you know what words you need your teammate to guess, and they have to guess them in a set number of turns. And so you might have banana and water and say, oh, you know what? I know if I say kayak 1 or kayak 2, they'll know there are 2 words that are related to kayak on this board, and they'll pick them. And then, in one turn, we've saved 2 secret agents. But it is one of those games where if you know the person you're playing with it really well, inside jokes, the funny thing you just told them this morning, can really just play into like semi-obscure clues to anybody else, but to your teammate, they'll know what you're talking about. So there's a lot of creativity and fun that goes into it.
That's awesome.
And Codenames Duet actually has, I think it's core to the original game. I don't think it's an expansion. A map that you can, after you've played this game, one game at a time, you can start to travel the world saving secret agents. And each city you go to has a variation of the number of turns you get and the number of innocent bystanders you can accidentally kill before you've lost the game. So I am not all the way through the map, but I am working my way through traveling the world, saving secret agents. And it's basically simple game, really good replay value.
That's amazing.
There's a lot of games these days that have like that sort of thing, or like achievement sheets with them where you can like, won the game with a score over 200 points, and you put a check mark on there, or won the game by having 5 of this type of item in your hand, and you check it off. And it's just adding to that wanting to play it again, which is super fun.
Yeah, fun is one word. Exhilaration is another word. I know the scenario is you're probably seated at a table and you are static, but seems exhilarating to be encountering those stakes and those stories, and sometimes maybe the mood. If it's literally horror, maybe it does have scary aspects to it. It's certainly more exhilarating than, sorry to keep knocking on sorry, but sorry just starts to feel kind of repetitive. Okay, all right, there's actual stakes here.
Right. But, after, Damon expertly going through all the different types of games, it really kind of shows that if you've been playing these classic games like Sorry and Chess and Clue, you've really set yourself up to kind of just, game pun intended, level up to some other games.
Heck yeah.
Right. And so it might seem like, oh, it's going to be too much of a learning curve. But give yourself some credit. You've been playing games like this your whole life. Yeah. And there's just a couple new mechanics. Maybe they use a different word to describe an action. But the more you play some new games, the more you'll realize that the actions you take are more similar and more familiar than you would have thought.
Yeah, I want to plug, bouncing off of that, Everett, the website Board Game Geek, just boardgamegeek.com, free website. I personally have my collection on there, and I can track it and add games that I want to buy. But one of the cool features on there is the games are rated on a weight system. And weight in here generally means complexity of the game. So learning a 1 value game is going to be a very easy game to learn that doesn't take a lot of time. Well, learning like a 4.5 is a 5-point scale game is probably going to take you a long time to learn. You're probably going to keep the rule book out in front of you, reference it multiple times. So finding that sweet spot where you've got games that you enjoy playing that are not too overwhelming, maybe pushing it a little further, is always a lot of fun to do.
That's what I'm going to try and tell my friends who just want to sit around and watch a movie. Some of these games, you can literally feel like you are in your own movie as it's happening.
Oh, I've got one that I think does just that, which is, and we own this one, which is Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. I have to say, if you love reading as a part of your board game experience, this is the game for you. If you like doing funny voices while you're playing a game, this is the game for you. Because you are not Sherlock yourself. You are you are a consulting detective. You are consulting and helping out Sherlock. The goal of the game is to figure out the mystery before Sherlock would have, and there's a metric in the back for you to know how well you've done. I do not try to make this my goal because I will never achieve it. But it's a board game. I think you would call it that, but the board is a map. Yeah. And then there are books. I think you can call them books because there are more than 10 pages. I don't know. And there are newspapers. Yeah. And there's a lot of referring back to itself. It has expansions.
Incredible.
And it's very immersive. By the end, you kind of feel like you watched a 45-minute TV show because you have gone from there being a murder to finding out who did it and their motive and probably some other kind of B-plot thing that you discovered along the way. And it's very immersive storytelling. Not not tabletop RPG. You're not creating the characters; they're already there. But you get to imagine what they look like. There aren't little figurines. There's very few, illustrations in the books. You get to imagine a lot of it, and that's something we have here.
Bouncing off of that too, I haven't actually played any of these. I just know about them, but I've hopefully at a convention soon I can try one out. There are now board games based on the Choose Your Own Adventure books. And so you've got a deck of cards and you have choices at the bottom of each one that will determine where you go next. I think there's like a danger meter as well that's increasing throughout the game. But that is kind of what Everett was saying, a very narrative-driven game that you're playing together.
That's great. I wanted to jump back to Ameritrash. So in my experience as being a freelance music journalist, I've never judged anyone's music taste. Like, I've always come to it as thinking, like, if you really love that band, if you really loved this album, it's not my place to say, if that album helped you, if you achieved some sense of joy from that album, I'm not going to judge you for your music taste. If the game was fun, it was fun for you. Is that sort of where you're coming from when you think of, like, Ameritrash? If you had fun with that, isn't that the best part?
I 100% agree. And that's why I said at the beginning, I don't love the term. Yeah. It's not great because it's, sure, maybe for the person who came up with that term, those style of games, not for them. Right. That's fine. You don't like high luck games where you're screwing everybody over. That's fine. Right. But a lot of people do. Party games exist for that very reason. They're meant to be over the top and like have a good time that way. And so there is definitely a time and place for it, and there's definitely a crowd for it.
Yeah. Did we anything else that we didn't bring to the table today? Did we leave anything else off the table? Oh yeah, I think we have mentioned quite a few of our favorites that are currently circulating. Did we not? Are there any that we didn't mention?
I have one that I would like to add.
Sure.
So, being a Midwesterner, especially in Michigan, growing up, euchre was a game I played a lot. Well, if you like euchre, we have this game in our collection called The Crew. And it is like euchre, but collaborative. You are crew members on a spaceship, and your spaceship is breaking down, and you're trying to accomplish tasks to move on to the next location. There are 50 missions that you play through in increasing difficulty, although I will say some of them kind of go up and down a little bit. And essentially there's 4 suits of cards. In this, they're colored rather than like clubs, hearts, spades, whatever. And at the beginning of a round, people will choose, like, I want to take the 8 pink card as one of my goals, and I want to take the 1 blue card as one of my goals. And so if everybody meets their goals working together, then you move on to the next mission. It is super fun. There's a second edition that came out, The Crew Mission Deep Sea, where it's a new story. You're underwater. There's some new mechanics for how it comes out. I liked it even better than the first one. But yeah, I over the pandemic, I played through all 50 missions with some friends of mine online. It was great. We had such a blast doing it.
Is it 4 players, or is it kind of...
Up to 4 players,
Okay.
Yep. And I would recommend 3 or 4. There is a 2-player mode.
Okay.
It's not the greatest because you have to kind of make an artificial AI with the cards, which doesn't work super well. But with 3 or 4, it's sweet spot. It's wonderful. And it's just like, you don't know what cards other people have. So you've got to kind of keep track of what's been played. And like, all right, so if I am trying to collect the 8 pink card, I have the 8 pink card. And whatever's played first, just like euchre, is the suit that will lead it. There is no trump. Actually, no, there are rocket cards that are trump over everything. And you just want to make sure that you take the trick that has the number you are trying to get. And yeah, without talking to anybody. You cannot communicate to anybody. The only thing you communicate is you can use a communication token to show one of the cards in your hand, and it has to either be the only card of that color you have or the highest or lowest of that card you have. So if I have like 1, 3, 8 yellow, I can show my 1 yellow, or I can show my 8 yellow. And then people will know, oh, okay, if I showed my 1 yellow, probably the lowest yellow card I have.
Sure.
Yeah.
Everett, did you have any closing thoughts? Any other games you wanted to talk about? Anything?
Well, we do. I think we still have this game, Isle of Cats.
Oh, yeah.
Which, you know, for the cat lovers out there, it's a must. For those who like to save cats from a villain, so they can get off. They have to get off this island before the villain gets them. But you have to fit them on a ship. And each player has their own color of cats. They have their own kind of, it's not a cat breed, but each color has its own name associated with it. And it's just kind of fun. And it's not, I mean, it's a bit like a puzzle game because the cats are not all shaped the same. How they fit on the ship and where you can place them on the ship can be tricky, and you're trying to get all of your cats safely off this island. Yeah, I
was just going to say,
Yeah.
if you say the title of the game fast enough, you reveal your feelings about cats. I love cats.
yes.
You'll love the board game box even more for that game. If you open up the lid of the box, on the bottom of it, you put the lid upside down on your table, and it has a target on it, and it says, set up step number 1, place cat here. So, yeah.
I have definitely seen that in board game boxes.
Yep,
as
it's great.
well.
Also, yeah, it's cat Tetris. I mean, you can't go
Right.
wrong with that. So,
Tetris.
yep.
Also beautiful design.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Everett, have you played the new flip and right version of Isle of Cats?
I have not.
It's Isle of Cats Explore and Draw. And so instead of grabbing tiles, you're drawing them on your ship. It's kind of the same game, but it's a card-based system more, and it is a little bit easier to get to the table. Really enjoyable.
Nice.
Well, folks, come to the Ferndale Library. We have board games in the adult section and the youth section, and just visit a service desk. Hopefully find Damon. And
Please do. Come tell me your favorite game. Come tell me all about it.
And more info in the show notes, too, about the board game club for middle schoolers, and you're hearing this in time to mark your calendars, parents with middle schoolers. I'm not under any illusions that middle schoolers are listening to this podcast, so check it out. It's coming out on June 8th.
June 8th.
All right. Everett, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Damon, thanks so much.
Woohoo!
Let's do this again sometime. You've listened to another episode of A Little Too Quiet. It's the Ferndale Library podcast. It's brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. And the music you hear at the beginning and end of each episode is by a local musician, John Duffy. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe, and leave a comment. It would help us find more listeners. And go check out a board game. We'll be back next week with more.